Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Calling for a Change, Episode 3, Vote by Mail. This series is presented in partnership with Civic Nebraska. I am Taiheem Pleasant. I'm a board member for Lincoln Cullen. I'm also a Lincoln resident that strives daily to uplift my community and make Nebraska a better place for all. And now we're joined today by our collaborator, Brad Christian-Sallis. I'll let him take the mic.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Brad Christian-Sallis. I'm at Civic Nebraska. I'm our voting rights field director. So today we're going to take some time to just go over vote by mail, what that process looks like, any questions and concerns that people might have so that everyone is prepared for this upcoming election, where the safest way to cast your vote is going to be voting by mail. And joining us today, we have someone who I've gotten to know really well over the past couple of years. He's my good friend. He's my boss. There's so many things I could say about this guy, but he's awesome. And more importantly, he's really, really smart. And his name is John Cartier. And he's going to kind of be helping us have this conversation about vote by mail.
Hi, thanks, Brad. Those words were very kind. Appreciate it.
Are you blushing?
For having me. Maybe a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm John Cartier. I've been Director of Voting Rights for Civic Nebraska since 2017, going into my second major election here as part of our election protection program and our Get Out the Vote efforts. And I'm very thankful to be on today to help spread the good word about vote by mail, and as well as some other great things we have going for the general election coming up here on November.
Definitely very excited about it. So first, John, you want to just kind of tell us, like, what is vote by mail? How's it kind of look? All the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. So vote by mail, or as it's also known as absentee ballot, is a process which voters can, in Nebraska anyways, request a ballot be mailed to their place where they're registered to vote. And it's mailed several weeks out before the election, and people have a lot of time to fill it out, consider their options and their choices. And through that, they're able to then return it back either through a secure drop box, in various counties, and you can also return it through the mail, of course, or deliver it in person to an election commissioner's office on the day of the election. And really, it's just a great tool for people to be able to vote, and makes it a lot easier for folks. We've seen some incredible results, especially from this last primary election here in 2020, where the main way people voted was through absentee ballot or vote by mail. It was over 80% people chose to vote through this method. And because of that, we were able to set a participation record, which has been around since the 70s. And we did this due to one simple thing. And the state, very wisely, in my opinion, sent out every single registered voter a post or a little envelope or postcard that directed people to sign up to receive their ballot at home. And it was a huge success. It was a very simple, easy thing that they're able to do to help facilitate voting during this time when COVID-19, of course, has really just turned our whole cities and how we interact with people upside down. So in a summary, vote by mail is awesome. It's something in Nebraska we've been doing for a long time. There's some of our counties that have made the switch, in fact, to do all vote by mail elections exclusively. And that's allowed for counties that are under 10,000 inhabitants, and we can get into more of that later. But that's, in a gist, what vote by mail is.
So, go ahead, Ty.
There you go, Brad.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that all voters got postcard saying where they could request a vote by mail, and that ended up creating amazing results. So is that something we should expect for this upcoming election, for voters to begin those postcards?
Great question, Brad. I know in both Lancaster and Douglas, the election commissioners there have said that they're going to do it on their own prerogative, sell that or send that postcard to every single registered voter. However, that leaves a huge part of the state that is kind of up in the air whether they're going to do it or not. The state could help pay pretty much all the funds with COVID-19 relief fund that they have available to them. That's how they're able to pay it during this primary election. But for some of these smaller counties, it's just really not in their budget. So in other areas, we can't say that folks can expect to see that postcard come through the mail for them. However, there is another way in something through Civic Nebraska we're done a lot of work with, and that's our voter registration portal / way for us to help people get connected with their absentee ballot and also information about what it is, and that's civicnebraska.vote. You can just put that into a web browser and go to it, and through there you're able to get your absentee ballot application printed off and sent to the appropriate place.
All right, you say you're talking a lot about these absentee ballots and you can get them, but like, how do people go to the process to request them? Is there a certain date and deadlines that we need to get those back into the mail so later on we can get our actual ballots?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that's available only to someone who's already a registered voter. And in Nebraska, the deadline to be a registered voter for the purpose of this election coming up, you're going to need to be registered by Friday, October 16th. Now, once you're registered and able to vote, you have up until, let me make sure I got this day here for everybody correctly.
I'm supposed to have it memorized, man.
Yeah, I know. For shame. It is so Friday, October 23rd, 6 p.m. That is the deadline to be able to register in person and to also request an early mail-in ballot. However, we really encourage people to do it today, to just get the process going now. Don't wait till that long. And then the rule is in Nebraska, those ballots, if they're going to be sent through the mail, need to be, what were we talking about, Brad? Sent by October 20th, basically.
Yeah, you want to send it in, kind of what we've seen is about 14 days before they're actually going to be due. So any ballot you have has to be turned in by 8 p.m. It has to be in the election commissioner's hands at 8 p.m. on November 3rd. So the kind of best practice recommended way to do it is if you are mailing it, to mail it those at least 14 days before. But once again, it's one of those things where you want to get on it as soon as you can and don't wait till the last minute at all. With anything, it's always better to be prepared and early.
So there's a lot of these other states you see they're still doing their countings after the actual election date, and especially in the primaries. So when it comes to vote by mail, let's say someone doesn't get it in those 14 days and gets it in on the 10th day. So will their vote still be counted after that November 3rd date as the votes are still being collected?
No, in Nebraska, if you miss the deadline and the election commissioners receive that vote by mail ballot after the polls close, then your vote's not going to be counted in that situation.
Yep. But if you are on like that 10th day and you realize like, oh shoot, I didn't remember to mail in my ballot, there are other options for turning in your ballot. So there's drop boxes that people can access, and you can also take it directly to your election commissioner or county clerk. So if you do forget to mail in your ballot, that is an option for you.
Yeah, exactly. And for example, here in Lincoln, there is a drop box that is right in front of the election commissioner's office, and that is right across the parking lot from where the DMV is over by 48th and Vine Street.
Yep. And the drop boxes are just like a polling place where it's just got to be in the drop box by 8 p.m. on election day.
Mm-hmm.
So can someone else drop your mail-in ballot in that drop box for you, or do you have to do it yourself?
Someone can drop it off for you. And
Yep.
so one important thing to mention about the vote by mail process is that every single voter is going to have to sign their name on onto the appropriate place where it shows. And this is a step that a lot of people miss. And it's a common way for your vote by mail ballot to get rejected. And so something that's kind of interesting in Nebraska for the various counties, someone can turn in their absentee ballot, weeks in advance, but if they forget to do their signature, or maybe there's some other issue with the ballot itself, then they're going to be put on a list of people who the ballot has not been accepted yet. And that gives you an opportunity to go in and remedy whatever the situation might be. Civic Nebraska, we call rejected ballot calls for Douglas County, and that can affect hundreds of people, and it's something that we're always cognizant of, and just want to make sure people know that when they get their absentee ballot, please read the instructions and follow them to the T. Otherwise, they're not going to accept your ballot.
Yeah, definitely make sure you sign the envelope, and that's just another reason why you want to get it turned in sooner than later, because if you forget to sign your envelope with your ballot in it and you turn it in an hour before, no one's going to have time to call you to tell you to come back and sign it. So you want to get your ballot in as early as you can.
All right, thanks, guys. And now that you guys kind of walked us through kind of the process of vote by mail, maybe we're transitioning a little to about kind of the success of vote by mail in Nebraska and some other places. So you mentioned this a little earlier. So there are 5 states conduct all elections by mail. So you got Colorado, Washington, Utah, Oregon, and Hawaii. And then our lovely states, kind of like you said earlier, John, is counties with less than 10,000 inhabitants can apply to the Secretary of State for mail-in ballots in lieu of having a polling place. So I guess how can that model of those 5 states be applied to the entire nation?
Sure. And it's worth noting that it's not in lieu of a polling place. There's still going to be places available in those counties where you can show up and drop off your absentee ballot, or just in that situation, just your ballot in general. So, and when we're looking at other models, like such in Colorado, where we see a lot of success in how they've done their elections for years now, they have something called voting centers, and by law, I think it's per every 10,000 inhabitants, there needs to be a voting center set up so people can go in and either drop off their ballot, or if there's an issue with their registration, get that taken care of. And you can even do it on the day of the election. So to your question, what can we try and model or dream about as far as changing our election systems? I think the future really is going to be vote by mail. There's an excellent report by the previous Secretary of State, John Gale. It was called the 2017 Election Advisory Task Force Report. And inside that report, John Gale said it himself best that the conversion to all vote by mail is going to be the most cost-effective, safest, and just more efficient way of eventually changing our entire election structure in the long term. And that's because of all the benefits it has. One really good test example we can take a look at and how vote by mail on a county-wide level has been super successful is in Garden County. Now, they were the very first county to make the switch to an all vote by mail election system. This was in 2018 during the primary election. And they went from getting middle 20% participation rate to, in that primary, getting well over 50% and becoming one of the top counties in terms of participation in the entire state. And their one simple switch was making that conversion to an all vote by mail election system. So, and since then, we now have about over 10 counties in Nebraska who have switched, and they're going to be doing it for the general election. So as you can see, it's really trending towards a way where once the counties make the decision, they switch to it. And anywhere we look in the country, there's been no place where they've reverted back to their previous voting style, because it is just so much more effective and drives better turnout for people. And it's a very relatively easy switch for election officials to make when considering the scale that you need to do to conduct an election, everything from training thousands of poll workers to securing all these locations. And in the middle of a pandemic, like going into person and congregating in tight spaces is probably the worst thing we can be doing right now. So absentee ballots, they really are just a godsend for us.
Yeah. So one thing I want you to talk about, John, is because I've noticed it even here right now. You said both vote by mail and absentee ballots. Is there a difference between the two? Like, why are there those two terms?
Right. Good question. And there is no difference. And the reason why there are those different terms is just because how it's codified in statutes throughout the entire country. In Nebraska, we refer to them a lot as absentee ballots. In other places, it's just, mail-in ballots. But those terms and language is interchangeable. They mean the same exact thing. It is a ballot that gets mailed to your resident where you're registered to vote, and it's something where you can fill it out and then return it either through the mail or in person or via an official drop box from the county.
All right. So kind of transitioning, you kind of highlight some of the successes of vote by mail. So like, who exactly benefits from a mail-only election?
Everybody. Everyone from election officials down to the voters to, in my opinion, just the entire idea of what democracy in this country should look like. And that's greater participation and getting as close as we can get to 100% of the people who are registered to vote participating in any given election. And vote by mail is the one policy idea or one administrative thing that people can make the switch to, and it solves a lot of issues relating to how are we going to drive voter turnout, among other things. And I know this can become a political topic in a lot of circles, or here on the news or whatever. Studies and anything we can look at, it helps all political parties equally. It's not like it's something that's going to benefit one political party over the other. It's something that just drives voter turnout, and that's across the board. And it's a really great thing for people to be able to have as an option.
All right.
Definitely. One question I have is, what potential solutions do you see or advice do you have for people who may bump into the issue of not having a stamp?
Right. Great question. So in past elections, including the one in 2018, the post office, if you just put the absentee ballot in the mail without a stamp, the post office delivered it anyways to election commissioner's office, or depending on what size county you are, the clerk, and that money was just then billed to the county. So, I don't want to promise people that's going to continue to be the case, but if you don't have a stamp and you don't have a car to be able to go drive to a drop box location, anything from having a friend do it for you or someone who's just willing to make that trip for you. But in prior elections, it has been the case where if people don't have a stamp, it still gets to the place where it needs to go.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. Any more questions, Brad, before we transition into the next segment of the series?
I guess the one final question I would have for John would be, which way of voting do you prefer? Obviously, right now we're in a pandemic, so I think most people are voting by mail, even if it's not necessarily their preferred way. But for me, I've always been like a vote in person. Like, I love being there around everyone. And now, like, there's nothing I want less than to be around everyone. But I just want to know, which one do you prefer?
So you're going to find this funny for a guy who, I mean, I talk about vote by mail all the time. I think it's the greatest thing ever. This primary election was the first time that I actually used it for myself, because I too usually always went to a polling place to cast my ballot. I enjoy getting the sticker. I like, the feel of just being in a room with other people exercising their rights. But, we're unfortunately in reality right now, it's not the safest thing to do. And I also like going in person because a part of my job, we also run an election protection program where we have poll observers go to polling locations to make sure, machines are working. There's no issues with people with disabilities who can't get in the building. So I also like to, get my hands dirty and get involved that way. But for this primary election, I chose to vote by mail, and it was great. I mean, I got it weeks ahead in advance. I had time to go through some of the more obscure questions that was on the ballot that I had no idea about. So I was able to finally see, like, okay, this is great. It worked well for me personally. Like, I think I prefer absentee voting at home more, but maybe that might change in the future when things get a little bit safer, and especially when my kids grow up and we can all go to our polling place together one day in the future. I'd really enjoy that. But as of right now, I mean, it's a great tool for people to use, and why not do it?
Definitely. Yeah. The sticker makes a difference.
Yeah.
I love being able to take my selfie with my I voted sticker.
Oh, yeah.
But like you said, like that extra time really does make a huge difference, because there's usually things where I'm kind of like, I don't really know about this specific race. And, when you're voting at home, you can just be like, Google, let me find out about this.
Exactly. And I'll also add, we have I voted by mail buttons for Civic Nebraska. People really like now. So I know we're giving those to people, especially really good volunteers for us. Or, if you want one, just hit us up. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, how do we get if we vote by mail, how do we get a sticker? Who's going to take the lead on giving stickers to the voters now? Who's going to mail them all out? All right.
John will take care of it for everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll do it. I got everybody.
You guys hear it here first. So if you need a sticker after you vote by mail, make sure you let John Cartier from Civic Nebraska know you need a sticker. All right. So now that we heard about a few successes with vote by mail in our state and other states, let's talk about kind of like the stuff you see on the TV, the myth and concerns about Facebook Live, not Facebook Live, but about vote by mail. I guess one of the questions I want you to address, or just kind of lead off into this segment of our interview, is can you address what happened in Georgia during their primary election? Like, they went from all vote by mail, and then they only had one polling place for 300,000 people, and like it just seemed like it was a chaotic mess. So I just want to know, can you speak on that, and what lessons were learned from that?
Yeah, so the situation happened in Georgia and recently in Wisconsin. They really had a tough election as far as the administration of it, and a lot of confusion and just kind of the chaos around it. We're fortunate enough in Nebraska to have fantastic election officials who, even though we had to change polling locations because we didn't have as many poll workers as usual, we really didn't miss a beat, because they were able to take that proactive step of encouraging people to vote through the mail, giving the basic education, and then doing that huge step of mailing everyone that application that they can just as easily return back to the election commissioners. So the other what happens around the country, I mean, it's commonly referred to as 50 shades of federalism. We have all these different states and jurisdictions who all have different rules for voting, and a lot of it doesn't work very well, especially during a pandemic, when if you close a ton of polling locations and you don't give out enough notice in time, people are going to be really confused. I mean, it happens here in Nebraska still. It's just something that, in any given election, you're going to have to deal with human error, which is a huge factor for ways things can go awry in an election to, acts of God at this point with the pandemic. So maybe you got some commentary on that as well too, Brad.
Well, I would just say, if anything were to happen here in Nebraska, one of the great things is that Civic Nebraska does have a voter protection hotline that you will be able to call and reach out to us if you do run into long lines. Because like you said, John, we've seen long lines happen here before. And a lot of times things are human error, especially what we've seen here in Nebraska. In some states, it's not also always necessarily human error. Sometimes there's the element of voter suppression, and just the idea that if you make sure a lot of people are going to have to go to one polling place, a lot of people aren't going to wait in line, it's tough. So we got to really teach people about all the rules around an election so that they know, like, even if you are waiting in line, if you're in that line by 8 p.m., you can stay in that line, and you are and must be allowed to vote once you're in line by 8 p.m. So I would say the biggest thing people can do is just we'll send out the hotline information so they have that. But then if you want to take a further step, like really get involved with our election protection program and help us out, go to different polling places to make sure all your neighbors and friends and people in your community are able to exercise their right to vote and not run into those type of issues.
All right. Hey, thank you too.
Okay. And that hotline number and it's live right now. So if anybody out there has an issue with, their absentee ballot, or have questions about registering to vote, or really anything related to an election, please keep it related to an election, is 402-890-5291. And that's a separate line that I have with me during regular business hours that I take calls from and will help people out with.
Yeah, John has to answer those calls. So that's why he's saying keep it related to the election, but you might get a couple of prank calls from me.
You're the one doing it.
Dang it, Brad. All right. So now it's kind of like outside of our state. So continuing on the same track. So can you kind of address some of the national discourse going on to vote by mail? Just you think of our own 45 tweeting about vote by mail being kind of basically a big scam. So and are we seeing similar attacks like that in Nebraska?
Well, the thing about that, once that latest tweet came out, I will say a lot of the Republican leaders in the state came out immediately and said there is no issue with absentee vote by mail ballots in Nebraska. They're secure, they're safe, reliable. Please use them. And it's smart because it's a great way to be able to get votes. And it's hard to address some of this because it is, quite frankly, pretty ridiculous. In Nebraska, we have relied on absentee ballots for decades for so many elections, and to suggest that those have all been fraudulent is kind of insane. Other than that, if you ask any election official in the state of Nebraska, this is anyone from a county clerk, an election commissioner, say in Douglas or Lancaster, all the way up to the Secretary of State's office, they're all going to tell you the same thing, that the absentee ballot in Nebraska is great. You can trust it. And it's something that we're going to continue to use in Nebraska. And the standpoint of where we are at Civic Nebraska, we're always going to promote and try and get policy measures passed that's going to continue to make sure vote by mail in Nebraska is a strong and reliable way to cast your ballot that counts. And probably the biggest thing that we've been trying to work on for the last couple of years is to get rid of the 10,000 inhabitant population requirement for counties who want to apply with Secretary of State to switch their elections to an all vote by mail standard. And that's something that we are really hopeful will get passed, hopefully in the next couple of years. One of the answers they told us before, just some people was, well, we'll consider making the switch to all vote by mail when people are over 50% of them are voting in an election by using it. And hey, we crushed that last metric, this primary, with over 80% of people in Nebraska choosing to vote that way. So it's already here. And to suggest that it's somehow rife for fraud and is really inappropriate and quite frankly dangerous to the basics way that we figure out how we're going to have people lead us.
Yeah. So I guess transitioning into that, so is voter fraud a real issue?
No, voter fraud is not a real issue. However, voter apathy and voter suppression, those are real issues that have been around since voting became something that not only just white males over the age of 21 can participate in. Any study you look at into this area is going to tell you the same thing. Voter fraud is incredibly rare. You're more likely to get struck by lightning twice than to be a victim of voter fraud. And so what we hear in the state of Nebraska commonly is we need voter ID laws enabled to stop voter fraud. Well, in Nebraska, we've never had a single conviction of voter impersonation fraud ever in our entire election history. So out of millions and millions of ballots cast, it's never happened once. And for us at Civic Nebraska, we are always trying to improve the access to the ballot box and making sure that people are able to participate, because really the issue we have in this country is not voter fraud. It's low voter turnout. And for us during this last primary election, we were really ecstatic to get over 40% of people participating in an election, which, it's an improvement. However, it's not good enough. It's not something where we're comfortable with staying at. And until we get somewhere, well, in some states, especially the ones that do all vote by mail elections, they're regularly doing over 70% participation, even for, everything from the presidential election year to some of those smaller municipal elections, which are just as important. This isn't something that only comes around once every 4 years. It's something that happens fairly regularly. And people, as easy as we can make it for folks to participate, is going to be something that yields great benefits for us as a nation in the future.
Definitely. And I would add a lot of the things we see around low voter turnout, it's because of bad policies that have been put into place that end up making people not want to participate in the system or not able to. For example, here in Nebraska, we have a 2-year waiting period once people are off papers if they've had a felony. So that's 2 years after your sentence and the end of probation and parole. And there's no policy reason for those 2 years other than the fact that we can kind of look at the history books and see that when Nebraska, in our history, we're looking at ways for how do we, be able to stop Black voters from participating in our democracy. We decided we would just give Black people felonies if they tried to vote. And that's a policy that went from there for where it was a lifetime ban. And I think around 2005, it got cut to 2 years, but that's still a policy that is solely there from coming out of slavery and racism and the desire that Black voters shouldn't be participating in. All across the country, our laws are just riddled with things that really have emerged from racism, but affect vote and affect turnout. So that's one thing I always like to point out is like the issues with voter turnout aren't all on just people not wanting to vote. It's a policy decision and things we've put in place. And I know me and John, we've done re-entry fairs where we've gone to the different prisons and tried to educate people to let them at least know after 2 years they're going to be able to vote again. But when we go in there, so many people still think it's a lifetime ban, and there's not that proactive education going on around that. So a lot of the issues we have with voter turnout are related to policies like that are still on our books.
Well said.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take it.
Oh, and just one thing to add: the scope of elections we have now in this country. So that's anyone over the age of 18 years old. That's only been around for a relatively small period of time. The 26th Amendment, it was ratified in 1971. So we're talking about 50 years of history in our nation where, Black people, white people, male, female, over the ages of 18 years old are allowed to participate in democracy. And then you keep going back, and it's a really depressing timeline to look and see how long it took for the ballot box to, again, be opened up to people who are not white, landowning people. And for us to have just really struggled in that area in this country, we're still dealing with the consequences of that to this day. I mean, everything that's going on right now with the protests and people expressing their anger and frustration with the policy and institutions in our country, I mean, it all stems back from how we created and set up our framework and who we decided was proper enough to be able to make a decision if something is important of who's going to create our laws and who's going to enforce them. And I mean, really just, it touches everything.
Thank you guys for that. All right. So I guess I have another question for you two. So people have been talking a lot about the mail delays with the USPS. So how's that going to affect, I guess, the mail-in voting, and how should people prepare for that?
I mean, I think the best way, if anybody has any type of concern regarding that, is to take your ballot to a drop box. But we've said, the best practice, the recommended best practice is making sure it's in 14 days before November 3rd. So that's October 20th. But I know for myself personally, I like to just take my ballot to the drop box or to the election commissioner. So I know it's there.
Yeah, that's really the best way to go about it, for sure.
So do you guys have any other things you'd like to say about myths or concerns people might have with vote by mail before we move to some questions from the audience?
You go.
You got it, John.
No.
Go.
The one myth that I hear a lot is, the problem with vote by mail is all these ballots are going to get mailed to, say, a family's house. Who's going to say that maybe that the head of the household isn't going to fill out the ballots for everybody and then fake everybody's signature on them and then return them? In practical sense, that really doesn't happen. And if people do that kind of stuff, it is against the law. You really should not fill out you should definitely not fill out other people's ballots and fake signatures. That is a felony. And the process is for verifying the ballots themselves. They're going to compare the signature with everybody that's already on file. And that's one of the biggest ways that they reject or accept ballots. And the signature verification is really important, and it's a very secure way of going about it as well.
Yeah, I would just add to what John's saying about the signature verification. In the years we've been doing our election protection program and our hotline and all that, we've never bumped into an issue where we've heard about, somebody having forged someone else's signature on their vote by mail. But we have bumped into the issue of somebody signed their ballot themselves and it didn't look close enough to their own signature from the past, so their ballot was rejected. So I think when we're thinking about vote by mail, the bigger issue is how can we make sure that people who are signing their ballot and trying to vote and participate in our democracy aren't being denied, because even as John was saying earlier with where our voter turnout is at, like we're not in the place where we have trouble with too many people trying to participate. The problem is we have too few people participating.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
right.
you. All right, so we're gonna go on and take a question from the audience member from Mikiki Eller. So she asked, how can we make sure that everyone votes? Whom and how do we need to motivate to register to vote? Age, group, etc. Any best practices?
I think we need to make sure everyone votes. So all age groups, all demographics, everyone. I mean, we live in what's supposed to be a representative form of government. So for it to be representative, everyone needs to be voting. I think as far as best practices, I always tell people to tell people why you vote, and really give people that personal reason, something that they can relate to, but also just that like rings true. There's not really some like, if you say these 5 words, like everyone will vote, because if there was, like, those would be the only words you ever heard me say. But since there's not, I just think it comes down to having honest conversations with people, and then making sure you have that conversation more than once. From campaigns and things I've worked on, usually when we talk about like how many times does someone need to hear a message, it's about 7 times. So that friend you have who you're not sure if they're going to vote, don't just text them once about it. Text them, like every 2 days leading up to October 20th when they need to send in their vote by mail. Also, Civic Nebraska, we do have a lot of volunteer opportunities if someone is wanting to get involved in turning out the vote. But we need to just turn out everyone in general, because that's how our democracy ends up speaking for all of us, is when the people who are in charge know they're responsible to everyone and not the smaller group of voters.
Exactly right. And Ty, you can attest to this in our friend group. Like when I found out who in our group friends was and was not registered and actually voting, like I was very loud and definitely reminded them a lot of times until they actually proved to me that they had registered to vote and were starting to participate, because it is an incredibly important thing to do for all of us. And kind of what Brad was saying on that end, if there's someone who you run into and you're trying to encourage them to register to vote or participate in democracy, you will run into people who will just say, what's the point? Everything's fixed, or I don't believe in voting, or, what have you. There's a million different lines that I've heard personally. And it all comes down to planting that mustard seed in somebody. It needs to be a personal conversation you have with that individual. You need to figure out what in their life is affected by policy, which is pretty much everything, what's important to them, and just connecting it with the simple act of going and making sure that they're voting for people who think that they're going to be best represented by. And if they don't, it's them acknowledging that there's nothing they can do and it's a hopeless situation. That's not the case. If voting was not a vector for incredible change in this country, it would not have been something that has been made so hard to do for so long for very many people in this country.
Yep. And along with that, I would just say, with voting, whenever we're thinking about democracy, voting is just one piece of the puzzle. So whether it's running for office, whether it's testifying in the legislature, whether it's protesting, those are all actions that can be taken to help strengthen our democracy and help make sure it's representing the people. And so you should be participating in the full range of things. Don't look at voting as just like, I do it every 2 years and I've done my civic duty, but really taking the time to be invested long-term, continuously in our democracy and shaping what this world is.
All right. One last question before we wrap these things up. So let's say I requested my mail-in ballot and then I lose it. Can I still go to the polls and vote?
Shame on you, first of all. Don't lose something that important. For something like that, you need to contact your relevant election commissioner or clerk to remedy that situation. And if you have another question about that, please reach out to our hotline for that situation.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, John, they would be able to, if they lost their ballot, do a provisional ballot.
Right. Yeah. For sure. But provisional ballots, we don't have to get too deep into what those are. Those do have a high chance of not being accepted for a variety of different reasons. So as close as you can get to your actual ballot in that situation, it's going to be preferred method, but there are some options available to you. But again, if you find yourself in that situation, please reach out to our hotline.
All right. Hey, Brad, John, I really appreciate you guys coming on, being our co-collaborators in this Calling for Change. Recap for our audience. So you got to know the three of us. You got to learn the vote by mail process, the success of vote by mail, not only in our own state, but the whole United States. And you got to get some of your myths busted, like Mythbusters right here on Calling for Change. And then also we took some audience questions. So I kind of want to preview next week because we kind of start hinting on this because you can't not hint about what we're going to talk about next week when you're talking about voting. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit about what to expect for next week's episode of Calling for Change, Brad.
All right. Yeah. Next week, we're going to have the full episode just focused on voter suppression, all the different forms that it comes in, and kind of what things you can be doing to help stop it and prevent it. So definitely tune in. It's going to be a really great episode. It's the piece of the work that got me wanting to do my job that I do now in voting rights is the fact that not everyone wants you to use your right to vote. So we gotta be aware of the ways that people are trying to prevent people from using that right to vote, and then know the solutions to it so that everyone is able to use their right to vote. John, you got anything on voter suppression you want to say?
Oh man, I got a lot of stuff on voter suppression.
That's why I'm excited for next week.
We can say that for next week, though. But I just want to say we appreciate you, Ty, and thanks for having us on. And again, everybody, it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about vote by mail today. And thanks to Lincoln Calling for helping put this series together. It's really important to continue to get that word out, and just education. It's so important. And every day we get a little bit closer to the election, and every day is an opportunity to get new people registered to vote and to request their absentee ballot and to fix any problems that might come up.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. Well, hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Calling for a Change. Make sure you tune in next week for Calling for a Change. We'll be talking about voter suppression. We'll have Brad back. Most likely we'll have the boy John Cartier back, aka my best friend, back. So make sure you tune in the same week or same time, same place, and we'll be discussing voter suppressions and what it looks like in Nebraska. Until next time, peace, love, and positivity.
Peace. Peace.